The transport shuttle had seen better decades. Jaren Voss gripped the fraying safety harness as the vessel shuddered through Aethari 7 artificial atmosphere, each jolt reminding him that humanity's diplomatic fleet operated on whatever the military didn't want anymore. Through the viewport, crystalline spires rose like frozen lightning against violet skies, their surfaces catching light that shouldn't exist and bending it into geometries that made his eyes water. "You know what I appreciate about the Aethari," Rhys said from the pilot's seat, his hands dancing across controls that sparked occasionally. "Their commitment to making everything as intimidating as possible really saves time on the whole. Will they respect us?" question. Jaren couldn't help the small laugh that escaped. "That's helpful, Rhys. Very calming. I live to serve." Rhys tapped a flickering readout that immediately stopped flickering, as if embarrassed. "Though between you and me, if their architecture is this extra, imagine their rejection letters. Probably arrive in black envelopes that scream when you open them." The moon grew larger, and Jaren felt his stomach tighten. 3 solar cycles ago, Aethari forces had swept through this sector like an elegant plague, conquering 17 human settlements before anyone understood what was happening. The casualties had been minimal. The Aethari considered outright slaughter wasteful, but the subjugation was absolute. Now humanity's remaining colonies in the outer rim balanced on a knife's edge, and Jaren carried their survival in a data chip of proposals that felt pathetically inadequate. "Run through it again," Rhys said, his tone shifting to something almost serious. "What's your opening? Express gratitude for the audience. Acknowledge Aethari superiority in stellar navigation and quantum architecture." The words tasted like ash. "Present the resource-sharing framework as mutually beneficial. Emphasize human labor efficiency in extreme environments." You're going to grovel and hope she doesn't vaporize you. Diplomatically grovel. "Commander Voss, you are a wordsmith." The shuttle began its final descent, and Jaren caught his first clear view of the palace complex. It sprawled across the moon's northern hemisphere like a frozen cancer, all impossible angles and structures that seemed to exist in more dimensions than his brain could process. Light moved through it like water, pooling in chambers visible through translucent walls, flowing up staircases that spiraled into nothing. The landing was surprisingly smooth. Jaren unstrapped and stood, tugging his formal jacket straight. The material was earth-made, obviously inferior to anything Aethari wore, but it was clean and carried the insignia of Earth's coalition. Small dignity in the face of cosmic indifference. "Try not to die," Rhys offered as the airlock hissed open. "I've got a betting pool running on how long you last, and I put good money on at least 20 minutes. Your faith is inspiring." The escort was waiting, 2 Aethari guards in armor that looked like sculpted starlight. They didn't speak, merely gestured for Jaren to follow. He'd seen Aethari before on vid feeds and intelligence reports, but confronting them in person was different. They stood nearly 7 feet tall, moving with a grace that suggested gravity was a polite suggestion rather than a law. Their skin held that distinctive pale luminescence, and their ears, elegant, elongated, sweeping back from their skulls, marked them as unmistakably other. The corridors defied reason. Jaren walked on floors that became walls, climbed stairs that reversed direction without warning, passed through doorways that dilated like living pupils. The palace's quantum architecture responded to the guard's presence, reshaping itself to create the most efficient path. To Jaren, it felt like being digested. Finally, they emerged into the throne hall, and every rehearsed phrase evaporated from Jaren's mind. The chamber was a cathedral of crystal and shadow, stretching upward into darkness, punctuated by floating lights that pulsed like distant stars. Pillars rose at intervals, each one humming with a frequency Jaren felt in his bones. The floor was black stone, polished to mirror perfection, reflecting everything above in dark distortion. And at the center, elevated on a dais of the same black stone, sat Queen Lyssara. She was terrifying. Jaren had seen the intelligence photos, read the descriptions, studied her military campaigns. None of it prepared him. She reclined on a throne that seemed grown rather than built, her posture suggesting boredom with existence itself. Porcelain skin caught the crystalline light and threw it back in subtle rainbows. Her hair, black as the space between stars, cascaded over her shoulders and moved with a life of its own, each strand floating as if submerged in invisible water. But it was her eyes that pinned him in place, violet, ancient, utterly devoid of warmth. Her ears rose from her skull in graceful points, decorated with rings of what looked like condensed starlight. When she finally acknowledged his presence, turning those violet eyes toward him with the speed of continental drift, Jaren felt himself shrink. "So," she said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries and the cold of deep space, "Earth sends me this." Queen Lyssara rose from her throne with the deliberate slowness of a predator that knew its prey had nowhere to run. Each step down the dais created a soft chime that resonated through the crystalline pillars, as if the palace itself announced her movement. Jaren forced himself to maintain eye contact, though every instinct screamed to look away. "Commander Voss." She pronounced his name like she was identifying a particularly mundane species of insect. "Your people requested this audience 6 lunar cycles ago. I granted it today because I found myself momentarily bored with more important matters." Behind Jaren, he could feel Rhys's presence, could practically hear his friend mentally composing inappropriately timed jokes about scheduling conflicts and cosmic priorities. The thought helped marginally. "Your Majesty, on behalf of Earth's coalition, I express gratitude. You will express nothing until I permit it." Lyssara reached the floor of the throne hall and began circling him, her movements unnaturally fluid. "Let me share what I know of humanity, Commander. When my scouts first encountered your vessels in the Kepler belt, they believed them to be debris. Imagine their surprise when they discovered creatures inside, actually piloting these constructs." Several members of her court, elegant figures positioned along the chamber's perimeter, made sounds that might have been laughter. Their ears caught the light as they tilted their heads in amusement. Jaren swallowed. Human engineering operates under different constraints. Constraints such as competence. Lyssara stopped directly in front of him. Up close, he could see the faint patterns of light moving beneath her skin, like bioluminescent circuitry. "Your first contact protocol involved firing projectile weapons at a diplomatic vessel. Your military strategy consisted of grouping your ships together, so my forces could disable them more efficiently. Your most advanced artificial intelligence has the computational capacity of an Aethari child's toy. In our defense," Jaren said carefully, "we've only had faster-than-light travel for 60 years. We achieved it in 18 months after discovering the principle. You required 7 decades." She resumed her circling. "Tell me, Commander, what exactly can humanity offer the Aethari Empire? What resources do you possess that we cannot simply take?" This was the crux of it, the razor's edge he'd been dreading. Jaren reached slowly for the data chip in his jacket pocket, hyper-aware that any sudden movement might be interpreted as aggression. "We've prepared a comprehensive framework for resource distribution. The outer rim colonies contain rare earth deposits that. Are you truly about to suggest that we, who transmute matter at the quantum level, require your dirt?" Rhys coughed. It was definitely covering a laugh. Jaren pivoted. "Human labor efficiency in extreme environments exceeds most known species. We're adaptable, resourceful. You are fragile organisms that require constant maintenance and complain about temperature variations." Lyssara's voice carried the practiced rhythm of someone who delivered this speech before. "The only remarkable thing about humanity is your profound overestimation of your own significance." The humming of the crystal pillars seemed to intensify, responding to Lyssara's mood. Jaren felt sweat beginning to form at his collar despite the chamber's cool temperature. He'd prepared for contempt, but experiencing it was different than anticipating it. Your Majesty, the coalition proposes a tiered integration system. Integration. Lyssara laughed, and the sound was like wind through a graveyard. You believe you have something worth integrating. How perfectly human. She stopped again, this time close enough that Jaren could smell something like ozone and distant flowers. Let me tell you what will happen, Commander. Your colonies will submit to Aethari governance. You will provide labor where assigned. Your vessels will be scrapped for materials. Your settlements will be absorbed into proper civilization. In return, we will not exterminate you, which is considerable mercy given your species' aggressive mediocrity. That's not negotiation, Jaren said, his frustration finally breaking through diplomatic training. That's conquest with paperwork. Is there a difference? Lyssara tilted her head, those elongated ears catching the light. We discovered you, evaluated you, and found you wanting. This is simply the natural order asserting itself. Natural order. Jaren's voice rose despite himself. You're 3,000 light years from your origin world, conquering species who never threatened you, calling it natural. We conquered 17 of your settlements in 6 standard days. Lyssara's voice went cold and quiet, somehow more frightening than her earlier condescension. Your entire defensive fleet managed to destroy exactly 3 Aethari vessels before surrender. 3. We lost more ships to navigational errors during the campaign than to human resistance. Tell me again about threats. The throne hall fell silent except for the eternal humming of the crystals. Jaren's heart hammered against his ribs. He'd pushed too far, let emotion override sense, probably just ended any chance of. He reached up to wipe the sweat from his brow, a gesture born of pure human nervousness. His sleeve shifted. For just a fraction of a second, light caught something on his wrist. Lyssara's violet eyes snapped to the exposed skin with the precision of a targeting system. Everything changed. The change in Lyssara's expression was microscopic, but absolute. Her eyes, which had held nothing but disdain moments before, now fixed on Jaren's wrist with an intensity that made the earlier contempt seem warm by comparison. The elegant dismissiveness evaporated, replaced by something Jaren couldn't identify but instinctively feared. Show me your arm. Her voice had lost its theatrical superiority, becoming flat and hard. Jaren blinked. I'm sorry. Your wrist. Show it to me, now. There was no request in those words, only command backed by the weight of an empire. Confused and increasingly alarmed, Jaren pushed his sleeve back further. The mark became fully visible, a spiral pattern that seemed to writhe beneath his skin, pulsing with faint bioluminescent blue. He'd had it since childhood, this strange birthmark that doctors had found fascinating but ultimately inexplicable. It had never hurt, never grown, just existed as part of him like his eye color or fingerprints. Lyssara descended the remaining distance between them so quickly that Jaren flinched. She dropped to one knee, actually knelt, and her long fingers hovered over the mark without touching, trembling slightly. The entire court gasped as one, a sound like wind through reeds. That's impossible, she whispered in Aethari, though her translation device rendered it into flat, emotionless English. It cannot be, not in a human, not in this primitive, she caught herself, violet eyes snapping up to meet his. Where did you get this mark? I was born with it. Jaren heard the question in his own voice. It's just a birthmark, weird genetics or something. Genetics? Lyssara stood abruptly, backing away as if he'd become radioactive. You believe this is genetics? Behind Jaren, Rhys's voice emerged in a confused whisper. Boss, what's happening? Did you accidentally tattoo something offensive in alien? This is the cipher of the first ones. Lyssara spoke to her court now, her voice carrying through the crystalline chamber. The mark of the keepers, it exists on this human's wrist. The court erupted in chaos, voices raised in multiple languages, some in the musical Aethari tongue, others in species Jaren didn't recognize. The crystal pillars responded to the commotion, their humming shifting to a higher frequency that made his teeth ache. "I don't know what that means," Jaren said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I've had this since I was 6 years old. Earth doctors ran every test imaginable. It's just a weird birthmark that glows sometimes." Lyssara looked at him like he'd claimed the sun was just a bright rock. "Do you have any comprehension of what you carry? Any understanding of the significance?" "Clearly not, or I wouldn't be asking questions while everyone stares at me like I grew a second head." "You might as well have." She began pacing, those fluid movements now edged with agitation. "The first ones built the Gateway Network. They encoded quantum structures into the fabric of space-time. They existed before the Aethari, before recorded history began. They vanished 3 millennia ago, leaving only fragments and prophecies." Jaren's stomach was sinking with each word. "Okay, so they were important. What does that have to do with my wrist?" The cipher was their signature, their seal. Lyssara stopped pacing to face him directly. "It appears only on those they deemed worthy to access their archives, to inherit their knowledge. We have searched 10,000 worlds across 3,000 years. Every Aethari dynasty has sought a keeper, believing one would arise from our people to lead us to transcendence. And instead you got me," Jaren said weakly. "A human who couldn't even get his ship's navigation system to stop calling him Commander Voss. Error." "That's a terrible pun," Reese muttered. "The ship AI should be recycled." Lyssara's eyes narrowed. "You jest while bearing the mark that defines my civilization's purpose. Do you understand what you've done? What you represent?" "I haven't done anything. I showed up to negotiate for colonies and accidentally flashed a birthmark." Jaren heard his voice rising. "I'm a diplomat, not some cosmic chosen one. I drink too much coffee. I can't fold my uniform correctly. I once got lost in a space station for 3 hours because I can't read Mandarin." "Silence." Lyssara's hand shot up. "Your inadequacies are irrelevant. The cipher does not make mistakes. If it marked you, there is a purpose. Or it's broken. Maybe first ones had quality control issues." One of the Aethari courtiers made a sound like choking on starlight. Jaren couldn't tell if it was horror or suppressed laughter. Lyssara moved closer again, studying the mark with visible conflict playing across her features. Pride warred with faith, contempt with prophecy. "For 3,000 years, we believed a keeper would be Aethari, that they would elevate us above all other species, prove our natural supremacy. And instead," she gestured at him with barely controlled fury, "a human, a species we discovered yesterday in cosmic terms, who builds vessels from welded scrap and calls it engineering." "Hey, our scrap is very efficiently welded," Reese offered. "This is impossible," Lyssara said again, but Jaren heard uncertainty creeping into her voice. "There must be verification, tests." "I volunteer for 0 tests that involve dissection or quantum probes," Jaren said quickly. "The Archive of Whispers." Lyssara spoke the words like a sentence. "It contains first one technology, remnants that respond only to the cipher. If your mark is genuine, it will acknowledge you. And if it's not," Lyssara's smile was cold and sharp, "then I will know you are either an elaborate fraud or a cosmic accident, and we can resume our previous discussion about humanity's insignificance." She turned to her guards. "Prepare quarters. The human stays." The quarters they assigned Jaren were more luxurious than anywhere he'd ever lived, which somehow made everything worse. Crystal walls shifted through subtle color gradients, responding to his presence with what the Aethari guard called mood harmonization. Currently, they were displaying a nauseating swirl of anxious purple and confused gray that Jaren felt was a bit too on the nose. He sat on furniture that adjusted itself to his body shape and stared at the mark on his wrist. Under the room's ambient light, the spiral seemed almost alive, its bioluminescence pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. 3 decades of having this thing, and it had never meant anything more than awkward doctor's appointments and occasional bar conversations. Now it was apparently a religious artifact that had thrown an entire empire into crisis. "This is fine," he said aloud to the empty room. "Everything is fine. I'm just accidentally the chosen one of an ancient extinct civilization that I've never heard of. Perfectly normal diplomatic mission." The wall chimed. Aethari doors didn't knock. They announced themselves musically. Jaren stood, tugging his jacket straight out of habit, and the doorway dilated to reveal Lyssara. She entered without waiting for invitation, because of course she did. Her earlier agitation had been replaced by a composed coldness that Jaren found even more unsettling. Two attendants followed her, carrying what looked like a floating silver tray covered in objects Jaren couldn't identify. "We will establish baseline information," Lyssara announced, gesturing for the attendants to set the tray on a table that helpfully rose from the floor to accommodate it. "You will answer my questions truthfully." As opposed to my usual policy of creative lying. Jaren regretted the words immediately, but Lyssara merely looked at him with those ancient violet eyes. "When did the mark first appear?" "I was 6. Woke up one morning and there it was, glowing on my wrist like someone had drawn it in light-up ink." Jaren rolled his sleeve back again, still not used to this level of scrutiny. "My parents thought I'd gotten into their laboratory supplies. They were xenobiologists, always bringing weird stuff home." Lyssara's expression shifted minutely. "Xenobiologists? Yeah, they studied alien life. Microbial mostly, sometimes fungal samples from off-world. Nothing as exciting as meeting actual aliens, which they never got to do before the accident." "Accident?" Lyssara picked up something from the tray that looked like a tuning fork made of frozen lightning. "Elaborate." "Research station failure, hull breach in the biological wing. I was 14. Jaren kept his voice flat, the way he always did when discussing this. "They were studying samples from a derelict vessel found drifting near Jupiter. Never identified the origin species." The tuning fork slipped from Lyssara's fingers and clattered on the table. She stared at him with an intensity that made the room's mood walls flare bright red. "A derelict vessel, near your system's gas giant. When was this?" 23 years ago, Earth calendar. Why? Describe this vessel." Jaren searched his memory, pulling up fragments from his parents' research notes that he'd obsessively read after their deaths. "Organic hull design, kind of looked like a nautilus shell. No identifiable propulsion system. The interior was empty except for sealed chambers containing biological samples." "Why does this?" "The first ones traveled in vessels grown from living matter." Lyssara's voice had gone very quiet. "Their archive ships carried genetic libraries, knowledge encoded in biological form. If your parents exposed you to materials from such a vessel," she stopped, violet eyes widening. "The cipher doesn't appear naturally. It's transmitted, encoded into genetic structure through contact with first-one materials. So I'm not special, I'm just contaminated." Jaren wasn't sure if he felt relieved or disappointed. That's almost better, honestly. Takes the pressure off the whole chosen one thing. "You misunderstand." Lyssara began pacing again, her elegant ears tilted forward in concentration. "The cipher cannot be transmitted to incompatible hosts. The fact that it integrated with your genetic structure means you possess the necessary receptors, the biological foundation that the first ones engineered into certain bloodlines across the galaxy. Your ancestors, somewhere in your genetic history, were touched by the first ones. My family tree is very boring, humans going back to the invention of record-keeping. Farmers mostly, some accountants. Surface genealogy is irrelevant. The markers exist at the quantum level, dormant until activated." She stopped pacing to study him with renewed interest that made Jaren deeply uncomfortable. "You were transformed at age 6. Have you experienced any unusual abilities since then?" "I can wiggle my ears." Lyssara's glare could have melted hull plating. "Sorry, nervous humor, it's a thing." Jaren forced himself to think seriously. "Nothing unusual." I'm decent at pattern recognition, good with languages, terrible at math. Pretty standard human capabilities. The abilities manifest gradually, sometimes over decades. Lyssara picked up another object from the tray, a sphere that seemed to contain a small galaxy swirling inside it. This is a First One diagnostic tool, recovered from ruins on Aethari Prime. Touch it. What will it do? If your mark is authentic, it will respond. If not, nothing. And if it explodes, then we will have discovered another data point. Lyssara's smile was sharp. Touch it, Commander Voss. Jaren reached out, half expecting his hand to be vaporized or transformed into crystalline lattice or something equally horrifying. His fingers made contact with the sphere's surface, which felt like touching warm glass and cold metal simultaneously. The spiral on his wrist flared brilliant blue. The sphere erupted with light, the contained galaxy expanding to fill the entire room. Stars wheeled around them, planets formed and died, nebulae bloomed like flowers. Jaren jerked his hand back and it all collapsed instantly, the sphere returning to its dormant state. Lyssara was staring at him with an expression he couldn't read but didn't like. "So," Jaren said into the silence, "that's probably significant." The Archive of Whispers turned out to be less a building and more a wound in space-time. Jaren stood at its entrance, a shimmering tear in reality that hung suspended above a crystalline platform, and wondered if his life insurance covered being disintegrated by ancient alien technology. "This is your last opportunity to confess fraud," Lyssara said beside him. She'd been unusually quiet during the transport from the palace, her earlier hostility replaced by something that looked disturbingly like anticipation. "Beyond this threshold, deception becomes impossible." "I've been telling the truth the whole time," Jaren said. "I'm just a guy with a weird birthmark who really wishes he'd stayed home and filed reports instead of agreeing to this mission. Your colleague suggested I tell you that if you die, he's taking your cabin assignment." Reese said that. "He also said," Lyssara paused, consulting her translation device, "that you should try not to get vaporized in a cosmically embarrassing way. I don't understand the humor." "That's because there isn't any. He's genuinely concerned I'll die stupidly." Jaren took a breath. "Okay, let's get this over with." He stepped through the tier, and reality reorganized itself. The archive existed in a space that hurt to perceive. Walls curved in directions that shouldn't exist, covered in script that writhed and changed as he looked at it. Spheres of light floated at irregular intervals, each containing what looked like frozen memories, battles, conversations, the birth and death of stars. The air tasted like copper and ozone, and something his brain kept trying to interpret as purple. Lyssara entered behind him, moving with unusual caution. "The archive has remained dormant for 2,000 years. Even Aethari high priests can only observe from the threshold. If it truly recognizes you." The spiral on Jaren's wrist blazed so bright he cried out. Light shot from the mark, connecting to the floating spheres, and suddenly the entire archive came alive. The script on the walls began moving with purpose, equations and diagrams flowing past in streams of data. The memory spheres pulsed in sequence, and Jaren felt something vast and ancient turn its attention toward him. "Welcome, Keeper." The voice wasn't sound but rather meaning that appeared directly in his consciousness. "You are the first in 2,347 cycles." "I don't know what I'm doing," Jaren said aloud, his voice shaking. "I don't know what you want from me. You carry the foundation. Knowledge will integrate as you require it. The galaxy requires balance. You will learn to provide it. That's incredibly vague and unhelpful. Your species excels at improvisation. This is why you were chosen." Lyssara was staring at him with an expression somewhere between awe and fury. "It speaks to you. The Archive of Whispers actually speaks to you." "Yeah, and it's being cryptic about my new job description." Jaren turned back to the presence he could feel watching from everywhere and nowhere. "Look, I appreciate the vote of confidence, but I'm not equipped for cosmic responsibility. I can barely keep my quarters clean. Cleanliness is irrelevant. Understanding grows with exposure. You will access knowledge as needed. For now, you must make a choice. A sphere descended to Jaren's eye level, and within it he saw Earth, his actual Earth, not some representation. He saw the struggling colonies, the coalition's desperate attempts at defense, humanity's fragile foothold in a galaxy that had barely noticed them. Then the image shifted, showing the same locations transformed, integrated with technology beyond human comprehension, thriving under systems that shouldn't be possible. The price, the voice continued, is accepting your role. You will mediate between species. You will unlock archives. You will prevent extinction-level conflicts. Your life as you knew it ends here. And if I refuse? The sphere showed Earth again, but this time the colonies were gone, absorbed into Aethari governance, humanity reduced to a footnote in someone else's empire. That's not really a choice, Jaren said bitterly. All choices are choices. This one simply has clearer consequences. He looked at Lyssara, whose violet eyes watched him with an intensity that could ignite atmospheres. The queen who had called him inferior now stood in a place her people couldn't access, watching a human commune with her civilization's greatest mystery. If I do this, Jaren said slowly, humanity gets protected. Protected and elevated, as will other species deemed worthy. Balance, keeper, always balance. Jaren thought about his parents, studying alien life in the hope of understanding humanity's place in the cosmos. They died never knowing their work had exposed their son to something that would change everything. He thought about Rhys, making terrible jokes to cope with impossible situations. He thought about all the humans struggling in colonies that existed on the knife's edge of extinction. Okay, he said, I'll do it. I'll be your keeper or mediator or whatever, but I'm going to complain about it extensively. Noted. The voice somehow conveyed amusement. You may begin by resolving the immediate situation. The archive released him and Jaren staggered. Lyssara caught his arm, steadying him with surprising gentleness. What did it tell you? She demanded. That I'm employed in the worst job in the galaxy, apparently. Jaren met her eyes, and that humanity's colony negotiations just got a lot simpler. The archive authorizes their independence under keeper protection. Lyssara's expression cycled through shock, anger, and finally reluctant acceptance. You're serious? Completely. Also, I'm going to need an office, preferably one where the walls don't judge my emotional state. Jaren looked at the mark on his wrist, still glowing faintly. And someone needs to tell Rhys he's getting a promotion. If I'm doing this cosmic mediator thing, I'm going to need an assistant who can make me laugh when ancient alien archives start making unreasonable demands. For the first time since they'd met, Lyssara actually smiled. It was small, reluctant, but genuine. This will be complicated. Everything worth doing is. Jaren stepped back toward the reality tier, exhausted and terrified and somehow impossibly ready. Come on, Your Majesty. Let's go negotiate how a human and an Aethari queen are going to prevent galactic extinction together. I still think you're inferior, Lyssara said, but her tone had shifted to something almost playful. And I still think your architecture is unnecessarily dramatic. We'll work on it. They stepped through together, leaving the archive of whispers humming softly behind them, and walked into a future neither of them had expected, but both would have to navigate. Somewhere in the palace, Rhys was probably composing another terrible joke. Jaren found himself smiling at the thought. The galaxy needed balance. Apparently, it had decided a stressed human diplomat with a glowing wrist, and a talent for inappropriate humor was the perfect candidate. The galaxy, Jaren reflected, had a very strange sense of humor. But then again, so did he.